And so today we are very, very blessed to have giving us a presentation, Passing on the Love regarding nutrition and enhancing cognition, Dr. Eric Sternlicht, an instructional associate professor for the Department of Health Sciences at Chapman University. And so please join me in giving a brain injury welcome to Dr. Sternlicht.
Thank you, Dr. Ignacio. What I will be doing throughout this presentation is going over research studies on factual and statistical findings on nutrition and diet. There's a lot of misinformation and books that are written that have no foundation in science. And I really caution you to take a look either through medical literature or scientific literature. One of the sites that you can go to is PLOS.org. It's the Public Library of Science, and you can get free citations off of that. So then you can look at the literature. It's not saying that every study is well controlled or properly done, but you want to see what is out there within the scientific community rather than anecdotal evidence that an individual has had. And that's wonderful that something has helped them. And whether that's a physiological or neurological process that is being affected or it's a placebo, if they're being positively affected, that's great. I used to tell my clients and athletes that I was coaching, you know, if there's nothing detrimental of that nutrient that you're eating, the placebo effect is better than nothing. So, you know, as long as it doesn't have any negative impact. So I'm going to start to talk about some of the research on nutrition and cognition, our brain function. And research into the nutrition and our body's functions has been going on for centuries, actually. You know, Socrates said food is medicine long ago, centuries ago. You can use food to impact your health. And I'll be showing you some slides of that. I did my doctoral research on diet and exercise and its role in diabetes. And some of that information is coming out slowly, but there's a lot of misinformation that's coming out or has come out about diet and exercise. But it can be used for cardiovascular disease, it can be used for diabetes. Now I'm starting to find it can be used for cognitive health. And I really didn't pay attention to the research articles that I'd come across until I had my brain injury. But it supports the way I've been eating and recommend in my classes, like pathophysiology, or to my clients when I used to be able to consult on eating. So if we look at the proceedings of the Nutritional Society, so they have a conference every year, and this is from 2011, and you know, they're showing evidence for a healthy diet, particularly phytonutrients. That is a plant chemical. Those can only be obtained in plant-based foods. Antioxidants, primarily from plant-based foods. Vitamin E, which can also be obtained from animal or plant-based foods. What's called, this N means omega-3 fatty acids. And you may have heard that they're listed on supplements. In fact, they're on front of package labeling health claims. DHEA, docosahexaenoic acid, is just one of the fatty acids that go to become our membranes. And I'll be covering that later. And a high ratio of polyunsaturated and saturated fats, but more importantly, the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So we'll be looking at the role of foods. And as I said, in 2011, the conclusion that was drawn from the proceedings that all of the conference presenters from the Nutritional Society is, studies showed, whether it's animal or laboratory or epidemiological studies, promise for the protection of cognitive decline. And then once again, those nutrients that we'll be covering. If we continue on, the dietary components that are in the Mediterranean diet, which is a diet high in vegetables, fruits, fish, whole grains, legumes, and monounsaturated fat. Those were, you've all heard about the Mediterranean diet, and studies since that time have looked into the mechanism behind the Mediterranean diet with cognitive decline and dementias. And one thing I want to make a statement about is, you need to not take a supplement because you hear it's beneficial. These studies that have found a benefit are generally with a deficiency in that individual. So it's either a low intake in that individual or a low vitamin status. People may be taking a supplement but not absorbing it. And the benefit is in the people that had a deficiency. Those that had a normal status, normal level, generally the findings have been negative or detrimental with that in not only cognitive health, but also in physical health. In 2015, from a large trial that was performed on individuals aged 60 to 77, I've done the conclusion here for you. Findings from a large, long-term, randomized controlled trial suggest that a multi-domain intervention could improve or maintain cognitive function in at-risk elderly people. What is a multi-domain intervention? It's diet, exercise, and cognitive training. Challenging yourself cognitively, and they compared that to individuals that didn't do any of those things, that didn't exercise, didn't diet, didn't have that cognitive challenge. And I thank Dr. Ignacio for the ability to work on this presentation, because it's been a cognitive challenge for me to work on it with a deficient short-term memory.
Great.
In 2014, there were studies showing that in older individuals, and here the average age was 82.6 years, that the DASH, and DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, and Mediterranean diet patterns are associated with slower rates of cognitive decline. Now, since that time, additional studies, and this one presented by Sina and Calder in 2020, have found that the DASH diet and the Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay, what is termed now the MIND diet, which is primarily a whole food, plant-based, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, whole grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts, and lower in animal protein as well as in processed meat is beneficial. We'll look at the mechanism behind that as we go along here. And now the government and the Senate Subcommittee on Food and Nutrition in 2022, just last year, had a hearing on food and medicine. And in that food and nutrition congressional hearing, there were a lot of doctors and researchers that went over how we can use food as medicine rather than using individual nutrients. We've known for hundreds of years that our diet impacts our health. And most of the causes of death in America and worldwide are related to diet. Diet is the number one modifiable risk factor for disease. And the leading cause of death, heart disease worldwide, the second leading cause of death, cancer, and the eighth leading cause of death, diabetes, are all related to diet and to obesity to some extent. And diet, we know, plays a role in that. And that's controllable. The National Cancer Society estimates that 80 to 85% of all cancers are diet related. There are things in your diet that you can do and modify to enhance the regression or the slowing down of the progression of cancer. So there are things you can do to slow that down as well. And cancer genes such as the BRCA1 and 2 or the HER2 gene play a small role in whether the individual would develop cancer. And since my brain injury, I'm even more convinced that diet plays a role. Let's look physiologically and a visual here at how one develops atherosclerosis. And this on the bottom is unhealthy eating. In a newborn, they have a clear vessel. There's a little bit of fatty streak down here. And the studies have shown that during gestation, if the mother is unhealthy and has heart disease and obesity, if she's hypercholesterolemic, this will occur even during gestation, and newborns will have some fatty streaks already. And then during teenage years, we start to see a greater progression of this fatty material on the inside lining of the vessel. Generally between 20 and 40 years of age, this is what the vessel looks like. And then by the time they're 60 or 70, there's so much occlusion that they either need a bypass operation or a stent procedure done. And many heart patients end up having multiple, either bypass or stents. And there are reports of individuals having up to 40 stents placed in their vessels because they don't want to change their diet. With normal aging, you can see the process is much slower. And I don't know whether I would say normal, since currently 42% of our population is obese. So I wouldn't call this normal because our American population is more like these lower slides here. Now, because our vessels become occluded, here we have the carotid arteries, and there's occlusion in the carotid arteries as well. So that's primarily due to diet. And I'm going to show you a slide a little bit later of Caldwell Esselstyn's work that had regression of atherosclerosis, complete removal of the atherosclerosis in the blood vessels. And what is recommended in that is a whole food plant-based diet. And here's the whole food plant-based pyramid. I acknowledge that that's extremely challenging. I eat a modified whole food plant-based diet myself, and I've been eating that since I was a doctoral student. My doctoral advisor said, by the time you're done with graduate school, you're not going to be eating animal products. And he was absolutely correct. I mean, I used to eat dozens of eggs a day, beef, because I was a bodybuilder. So I was primarily on a high protein diet, and protein, you can get adequate amounts in legumes, in beans, in lentils, in seeds, in whole grains. Take a look at Quaker Oats. And Quaker Oats is still 8% protein. You can see it by dividing the calories that you're obtaining from protein from the total calories. Most grains have 10% protein in them. So protein isn't what's needed for your health. It's primarily carbohydrates and healthy fats. Now, this whole food plant-based diet needs to be limited in processed foods. And that's including vegetarian or vegan diets. A vegan diet could be highly processed. And there have been studies that have looked at ethical vegans compared to healthy vegans, health-motivated vegans. And the diet is drastically different when you look at individual nutrients. And even on the whole food plant-based diet, nuts, avocados, other whole foods that are high in fat need to be used sparingly. You can't just eat unlimited amounts of avocado, which is 93% fat. Otherwise, your blood vessels will end up getting clogged, even though it's a healthy fat. And you're going to give yourself extra calories. Fat in itself is not bad. What is bad is the type of fats and limiting the calories that you eat. And calories from lipid or fat is twice as calorically dense as calories from protein or carbohydrate. Protein and carbohydrate have 4 calories per gram, whereas fat has 9 calories per gram. So foods with fat in it just boost the caloric intake up. And unfortunately, there's excess food intake and reduced activity that is leading to the obesity epidemic in our society. And body fat is a detrimental thing for brain injury, excess body fat. Here is Esselstyn's 1995 study looking at coronary vessel. This is an angiogram. On the left-hand side, this A slide shows the occlusion in their blood vessel in this area. And after 32 weeks on a whole food plant-based diet, no, I'm sorry. Going back, this is actually 32 months. That shouldn't be weeks on the title here. This is 32 months. Their blood vessel was patent, open. They had got complete regression or reversal. So rather than going towards the right on that slide earlier from Sarius, you're going to be going to your left. And it's important to have open blood vessels going up to your brain. We have enough damage in our bodies from our brain injury. We want to retard any impediment that we might have. Now, this is very interesting. A study, all in 2019, did inpatient population. So these people were hospitalized and they were put on two different diets, but the diets were matched for calories, sugar, fat, fiber, and the other nutrients. So they had the same amount of protein and carbohydrate in the foods that they ate. Now, ad libitum means they could eat as much as they wanted. The amount of food wasn't controlled. It's just how it was presented. So this is an example up here. You can see an ultra-processed salmon burger with cheese, one tomato, but processed bread. And then you can see on the right, the whole food. So everything was identical in terms of the nutrients. After 14 days, 2 weeks, the group on the ultra-processed diet ate significantly more food than those eating a whole food plant-based diet. On a whole food plant-based diet, you're getting fiber, you're getting water as you're taking in the food. Water content in fruits and vegetables is very high. And that helps to slow down your eating, the amount that you eat. Your stomach registers not only volume, but the density of the chemicals in it. And there are thousands of phytonutrients or plant chemicals in a rainbow array of plant-based foods. Let's look at body weight. Well, over 14 days, the ultra-processed diet, highly processed diet, they gained weight when they were eating as much as they want of that food. The group on the whole food diet significantly lost weight. There's a significant difference between the ultra-processed and the unprocessed after just 2 weeks. And that was related to the amount of calories that they were taking in. Now you say, how does this relate to my cognitive function? Well, in this recent 2022 study, they showed a higher percentage of daily energy consumption of ultra-processed foods was associated with cognitive decline among adults from an ethnically diverse sample. These findings support current public health recommendations on limiting ultra-processed food because of their potential harm to cognitive function. I know we all want to have improved or at least stabilize our decline in cognitive function. And I can't implore you more in eating a more whole food diet and one that is primarily plant-based. Now, advertising has a lot of deceptive claims. The Center for Science and the Public Interest has petitioned the FDA over a decade to reduce or eliminate front-of-package health claims. But they're still allowed, and maybe part of that is special interest groups paying the individuals and funding research for the individuals, the scientists and doctors that are on that board. There is a difference between whole grain foods, so whole grain pasta, whole grain wheat, whole grain barley, whole grain cereals, and whole wheat. Whole wheat, even though this is from Trader Joe's and you think they have healthier options, whole wheat is devoid of most of the fiber. And we're going to see that fiber plays a role in our brain health. You want to focus on whole grain products rather than whole wheat products. But the general public doesn't know that. They see whole wheat and they think, oh, that's what I should be buying. Be cautious of the front of package food labeling. I'll show you a few more later on. So let's get on to what the individual nutrients look like. Now, you don't need to think about individual nutrients because you need to think about food in general. What foods are healthier? Now, most of the scientific research that goes on focuses on reducing certain nutrients. The FDA, the World Health Organization, also focuses on such things as fat, reducing saturated fat, adding sugar or added sugars, salt. Instead of focusing, or in addition to focusing on the whole diet, because there's a rainbow of colors, there's also a rainbow of chemicals that are in fruits and vegetables that are essential. And the recommendations made by these organizations, the WHO and the FDA, are echoed by our government policy actions and by the food industry. So let's look at fats from common foods. So fats are really, the chemical term is lipids, because what makes the difference between an oil and a fat is the amount of saturated fat in it, and a fat is solid at room temperature, most, with the exception of the tropical oils, palm kernel, and coconut oil. And I'll discuss why that is in a few minutes. And a lipid that is liquid at room temperature is considered an oil. A margarine is semi-solid because of the chemical nature of that. So every fat that you take in the foods that you eat are a combination of saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and polyunsaturated fats. Now, the tropical oils are liquid at room temperature because they're what are called short-chain fatty acids. Their chemical structure has fewer molecules in the atom, and therefore it is a liquid at room temperature. But don't be misled to believe that the tropical oils are healthier, either in terms of degenerative diseases or in terms of degenerative brain health. Here we're looking at the length of the carbon chains. This 18, this first number, tells you how many carbons are in that chain, and 0 tells you that there are no double bonds. So you don't have to worry about that. These are the saturated fats in the major protein food sources that Americans eat. Cheese, highly saturated. This black stands for palmitic acid, and it's a 16 carbon length chain with no double bonds. And then we also have stearic acid, which we see in higher amounts in milk than in beef and meat than we see in milk or cheese, but it's nonetheless any better. And studies on eggs or on dairy, or for that matter, beef, you need to see who is funding that research that shows an anomaly, that they show a benefit from eating any of these foods. Because how a researcher designs their study can determine what their results will be. And the general public won't understand the scientific methodology, but a researcher will see that, well, that study is a lot weaker, and it was designed in such a way that their outcome is highly likelyable. So we have other fatty acid chains within coconut, palm kernel, and palm oil. There's primarily this capriotic and butyric acid is the primary fatty acid chain, short chain. That's what allows it to be liquid. Now, we have essential fatty acids in our diet. essential fatty acids only need to be eaten about 1% of your total caloric intake to have adequate amounts. But the essential fatty acids are eaten in abundance. So we need to look at the ratio of omega-3 fats versus omega-6. Most of the oils that are used in processed food are high in omega-6. And that's because they're inexpensive. Our government subsidizes the corn industry. Well, corn oil is used in a high amount because of that government subsidy. It's inexpensive. High fructose corn syrup is used for processed foods and sweetening agents. So they're using that corn for multiple different processed individual nutrients or food fragments. On the other hand, canola oil, the fish oils, flaxseed oil, and walnut oil, but the amounts found in walnuts, almonds, are higher in the omega-3 fats than you'll find in the omega-6 fats. So why are these important? Well, our cell membranes are what are termed phospholipid bilayers. These are the fatty acid chains, the polyunsaturated fatty acids. And here we're seeing a saturated, it has a kink in it, versus an unsaturated, I should have said unsaturated versus a saturated phospholipid. Now, you don't have to know this chemistry, but let's take a look at how we can modify our membranes in our body, how the foods we eat impact what we are and how we function. So we have dietary fat that's either omega-6, so this linoleic acid is 18 carbon, 2 double bonds. It's an omega-6 fatty acid. And then we have omega-3 fatty acids. Primarily one is alpha-linolenic acid. Remember this number, the first number is the chain length, and the second number is how many double bonds. When we ingest these fatty acids, they compete for the same enzymes. So if you have more and an abundance of omega-6 fatty acids, they're going to get incorporated into your membrane phospholipid, your membrane fats, as what's known as arachidonic acid. If you take in fish oil, which has EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, or DHA, deoxypentaenoic acid, then you can get it directly, or eating flax, eating soy, eating other healthy nuts, you're going to be getting alpha-linoleic acid, and that will determine how much EPA gets in the membrane. Why are our membrane phospholipids so important? Because when we're exposed to stress, this COX-2 is an enzyme that is stimulated in response to stress, whether it be mechanical stress, hypertension, or chemical stress, nicotine, or for that matter, oxidants. And you've heard of antioxidants. Well, we have oxidants in our body as well. And I mean, we function with oxygen. We need oxidation reactions to occur, but it's when it's in excess. What's released from the membrane are pro-inflammatory, what are called eicosanoids, chemicals. We have prostaglandins, leukotrienes, thromboxanes. If you have an abundance of EPA, we produce anti-inflammatory eicosanoids or chemicals. And the inflammation level in your body will be impacting your brain, because the amount of oxidation that goes on in your cerebral spinal fluid, in the fluid that bathes your nerve cells, impacts whether you develop Alzheimer's. Research shows that it plays a role in dementia, and now it's been shown it plays a role in memory, depression, and other cognitive factors. So let's take a look at what a diet that's high in omega fatty acids. So in this study, they used a diet that had nuts, walnuts, almonds. They also included some fish in this. And here's their phospholipid composition. At the beginning, after 2 weeks, and after 4 weeks. The original N6 to N3 ratio, and this is important. This N6 we want to decrease, N3 we want to increase in order to have more N3 in the ratio. Well, let's look what happened. Saturated fat didn't change at 2 or 4 weeks. The monounsaturated fat that was in the membrane didn't change. But there was a statistical decrease in the total amount of omega-6 fatty acids and an increase from 5.5 to 10.37 in omega-3 fatty acids. The subjects went from a ratio of 7 to 1 to 3 to 1. And they did this decrease in the N6 to N3 ratio within 2 weeks. You can affect your membranes. Here's a study that looked at different levels of salmon intake after 4 weeks of salmon consumption. Here's the baseline with about 3 grams. Here's the omega-6. Here's the omega-6, the omega-3. And here's that N6 to N3 ratio. And you can see after 4 weeks, there was about a 30% drop, 25 to 30% drop in the ratio. What means the arachidonic acid decreased while the eicosapentaenoic acid increased. You see a greater increase with 180 grams, 6 ounces, about 6 ounces of fish.
Professor Eric, can I ask a question now, or do you want to wait till the end?
Daniel? We can come back to this slide. I'm not.
We'll wait till the end. Please continue, sir.
Thank you, Ruben. And with the greatest amount, it was 9 ounces. It went from 8.4 to 4.5, about a 50% decrease in the change in your membranes, which ultimately will change the amount of antioxidants or the amount of inflammation within your bloodstream. And you can ask your doctor for a test. It's called C-reactive protein. That is produced by your liver, and it gives an indication of just generalized inflammation in your body. And what you would ask for is an HS, lowercase h, lowercase s, and then capital C, capital R, capital P, an HSCRP test. See what your level is, and then try a whole food plant-based diet. And I will guarantee you, if you follow a primarily whole food, you decrease the amount of processed foods in your diet, and you increase your whole foods and vegetables and fruit, and not frying the fruit or vegetables, but eating it steamed or warmed up, but eating the fluid as well, or eating that raw, I will guarantee you within 2 to 4 weeks, you will have a significant drop in your HSCRP. It's very rapid. Now, why is that important? The amount of inflammation? Well, let's look at the changes on that high omega-3 fatty acid diet. These are inflammatory chemicals. And you can see that they reduced significantly in 2 weeks. In the study by rats and colleagues, within 2 weeks, there was a significant drop in inflammatory chemicals in their body. Think about that, how it will affect your brain. And don't, yes, watching, you've seen my cognitive improvement, but don't just believe it because you've seen it. Look at the research that shows the benefit. Now let's look at the inflammatory markers and tumor necrosis factor A, or alpha, the difference between omnivores, meat eaters, and vegetarians. You can see significantly higher levels of these inflammatory markers that are in the white blood cells that take up the inflammatory markers in the meat eaters compared to the vegetarians. Significant, highly significant differences. In a study, a 2022 study, their results suggest low-grade inflammation at midlife is an independent risk factor for poorer cognitive performance later in life. Of their study markers, interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis alpha, what we were just showing, seems to be stronger predictors of cognitive performance and decline. Now, you can eat animal protein, but let's look at the difference between animal protein and the amount of omega-3 fatty acids to omega-6. This is the opposite. Omega-6 is on the right, is in the denominator. Omega-3 is in the numerator. So a higher number means there's higher levels of omega-3s. And you can see cold water fish, much higher in omega-3s than warm water fish. So the deeper the fish swims, the colder from Alaska, those have higher levels than Pacific salmon, higher levels than Atlantic salmon. You can see that here. So there's the little difference in the fish that you eat. Now, if you look at animal protein from beef, pork, chicken, it's much higher, significantly higher in omega-6. Their ratios are 0.13, 0.14, pork 0.25. They're much higher in the pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids that lead to inflammation in your body. Now, tilapia, which is a very inexpensive fish, is not healthy. Tilapia is farm-raised. They eat corn mix, and because of that, it's very high in omega-6 fatty acids. And those farm-raised fish have an omega-3 to omega-6 ratio of 0.15. It's as bad for you as eating beef. So you have to look at the type of fish. You can't just say fish is healthy. Certain fish is healthier. Now, another thing that's in our food is added sugar. Now, fructose makes up half of the molecule sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar. But fructose is also found in fruit. That's why the name fruit. Fruit sugar. However, when you eat it concentrated, in high concentrations, so yes, dried fruit in some individuals increases fat levels in their blood, but added sugar is also highly concentrated. The amount in sugar-sweetened beverages has increased, and the amount of obesity has gone up in line with the increase in sugar-sweetened beverage intake. The amount of sugar-sweetened beverages or whole foods, processed foods, they have added sugar. And now the FDA requires food manufacturers to list on the food label, that nutrition facts label, the amount of added sugar. Most people don't read the ingredient list. They look at that nutrition facts. Well, look at the amount of added sugar in there. Because if you're sedentary, if you're obese, if you eat a high-fat diet, your livers don't convert that fructose into glucose, what is blood sugar. It converts it into lipid, into triglycerides, which then get pumped out into your bloodstream. So dietary added sugars get converted and increase fat formation in your liver. So it's not just the lipids you eat, it's the added sugars that you eat that become detrimental as well. Now, you've heard about fiber and fiber supplements. You've also heard about probiotics, kefir and yogurt. Probiotics are supplements or foods that contain living microorganisms, bacteria. Now you'll say, oh, wow, I don't want it to have that. Well, there are beneficial bacteria and detrimental bacteria. To let you know, your intestines have over 1 trillion bacteria in it. We produce different bacteria, and we'll see in a few minutes that affects our cognitive health. Prebiotics are the high fiber foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and they act as food for the bacteria, the microflora within our gut. And they change our gut, what's called our gut microbiome. And there's been a lot of research looking at gut-brain health. And Sue-Ann is going to be talking about that when she gives her presentation. Another thing that affects our amount of inflammation is dietary methionine. Methionine is an essential amino acid. Most Americans get plenty of methionine, and it's found in high quantities in animal-based meats and proteins. So you're going to find it in beef, lamb, cheese, dairy, pork, fish, and shellfish. What's referred to as the SAD diet, the standard American diet. It's found in low to moderate quantities in beans, nuts, and soy. And that we need it. It's an essential amino acid. We have to obtain it in our diet because our bodies can't produce enough of it. But we don't need very high amounts of methionine. Now let's look at these inflammatory cytokines, these eicosanoids that are produced. Their levels in the brain with methionine, which is this red here. The SAL is the control solution. Here's the methionine group. And each of these are significantly higher with the exception of CCL5. But all of these, including that tumor necrosis factor, are significantly higher on an omnivore diet. In a study in 2021 by Fang, a low methionine intake, so primarily vegetarian or vegan diet, our liver senses the amount of methionine. It's transported, it's absorbed in, and our liver, depending upon our methionine levels, changes the concentration and the formation of fibroblast growth factor 21, FGF21. And if methionine levels are low because you're not eating it, then this FGF21 goes up. It impacts our brain and the hypothalamus in the brain. So our central nervous system and sympathetic nervous system outflow will change. The physiological responses, it increases the formation of brown adipose tissue as opposed to white adipose tissue. And the brown or beige adipose tissue burns significantly more calories and more fat at rest than does white adipose tissue. Because of that browning, it increases energy expenditure. It decreases fat deposition. It increases, FGF21 increases insulin sensitivity and glucose uptake. And it decreases both your liver and circulating lipids. So let's look on the left on this plot A, the difference in FGF21 between omnivores, and this line is the mean, and vegans, just in general, what their diets gave them at baseline. Then they put omnivores on a vegetarian diet. So they put them on a vegetarian diet for 4 weeks. What happened to the FGF21 is significantly elevated by being on the plant-based diet as opposed to being on the meat-based diet. Within 4 weeks, I can't say it enough, you can have results relatively quickly if you follow that whole food plant-based diet. The foods we eat in the intestine affect the various chemicals that are in our bloodstream. They affect tryptophan metabolism. Tryptophan is a precursor of many neurotransmitters, brain chemicals that affect serotonin levels, dopamine, which have been implicated or they play a role in mood in the individuals. They affect vagus nerve stimulation. They have an influence on the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. So the amount of stress the body is under. They play a role in our immune system, all of which helps our cognition, our mood, our behavior. So our dietary intake of fat, protein, carbohydrates, polyphenols, which are plant chemicals, and pre and probiotics will change our gut bacteria, which have biological effects in the body, leading to the production of pro or anti-inflammatory metabolites. And those affect not only metabolic and physiological diseases, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, autoimmune diseases, but they also affect cognitive function. Here are some of the chemicals that are produced. I don't need to go over this, but you can see it's a fairly complex system that works in our intestine and in our intestinal lumen with the bacteria that are present. In the study by Howe, they looked at the microflora and a certain class of microflora in a control population and in a population of depressed, clinically depressed individuals. And these depressed individuals were antidepressants. These are the microflora, the fungal microbiota within two classes of microbiota that play a role in our cognitive health, our brain health. And you can see that there's an overlap of 700 microflora, but there's also a different colony of bacteria that are produced in the control individuals or control subjects' intestines, and there's a different group of microflora that are produced in the clinically depressed individuals. Here we're looking at the difference between the control and the depressed population, and they looked for what's called an LDA, a linear discriminant analysis. That's just identifying the microflora. They used a score greater than 3 in order to be considered in this comparison. So rather than listing all thousands of microflora, they listed the ones that were higher than 3 or less than 3 in depressed individuals or in control individuals. And you can see there's a statistical difference between the bacteria that are produced, and the researchers contend our diet is influencing and impacting our microflora. Dietary polyphenols, which are plant chemicals, affect your intestine, and one of the classes of the intestine are bacteria deaths. Another class is firmicutes, if you want to look them up. Because bacteria deaths increase, it reduces the F to B ratio, the firmicutes to bacteria deaths. So on the scale, it's showing this being heavier, and you find metabolic improvement. And based on recent research, you also find cognitive improvement. Let's look at probiotic supplements. Here in this study, they looked at older individuals who are healthy older individuals, not brain injury patients, not diseased individuals, but healthy population. In a control that was taking in a placebo, they had a reduced mental flexibility, whereas there was because a negative number is a positive response in terms of mental flexibility, had a significantly lower degree of cognitive stress when they took a probiotic supplement. So that all they did was add fiber to their diet. They didn't change their diets. They simply added these probiotics to their diet. Now, in this study, which is interesting, they had subjects eat a high-fat, high-sucrose meal. Both groups ate the same food, but one group added 30 grams of fiber to that meal. So they were eating a high-fat, high-calorie diet on 2 separate occasions. They were randomized and brought in on 2 separate occasions, and they measured the change in reactive oxygen species. That gives an indication of oxidation within the blood. Adding 30 grams of fiber significantly lowered the antioxidant, or lowered the oxidation level, the pro-inflammatory levels. And you can see here, the area under the curve was significantly lower, simply adding fiber to a meal. Now we're looking at meal timing. How does meal timing affect it? Is it better to eat more of your calories at breakfast and slowly eat smaller meals throughout the day? Well, in this study, they gave subjects what's called an oral glucose tolerance test, an OGTT. They ingested 75 grams of a sucrose glucose solution. And they looked at blood glucose over a 2-hour period of time. The circles are having that meal at 8 a.m. The squares are having that same oral glucose tolerance test challenge, that glucose challenge, at 8 p.m. After fasting for 6 hours, your blood glucose levels are significantly lower when you eat in the morning and when you challenge yourself than when you eat in the evening. Let's look at a low glycemic index meal. A low glycemic index is some food or some meal that causes a slow rise in your blood glucose levels. And it also causes a slow rise in your insulin level. Beans and legumes, lentils are very low glycemic index. Whenever you have a sharp rise in your blood glucose, there's a hypoglycemic rebound. Your blood glucose actually goes below your resting levels. And that creates those mood swings, that it creates other physiological stress. Well, let's take a look at having a meal which is low glycemic, what the blood glucose was after the meal, postprandial. Well, we see the rise in blood glucose at 8 a.m. and the corresponding rise in insulin. Insulin is released in response to your blood glucose levels. Whether the meal was eaten at 8 p.m. or midnight, there was no significant difference in blood glucose levels. It was significantly higher than when eaten at 8 a.m., but there was no difference between 8 p.m. and midnight. There was also no difference between 8 p.m. and midnight in terms of the plasma insulin, but it was significantly higher. This plasma insulin was significantly higher in both the 8 p.m. and the midnight eating of each of those foods. So I mentioned front of package food labels, nutrition labels. The Center for Science in the Public Interest is petitioning Congress to change the rules on health claims that can be made on food products. And currently, there's no regulation. You can make claims as much as you want. You can have images, and there are certain images that have to be controlled, like a heart. In order to say heart healthy, that product cannot contain cholesterol. Well, heart healthy, corn oil is cholesterol free. For that matter, any plant-based product is cholesterol free. So when you walk down an oil aisle, all of the plant-based oils will have a heart on the front of it. Does that mean it's healthy? Definitely not. Because if you're eating corn oil, you're having significantly higher levels of arachidonic acid or linoleic acid, which becomes arachidonic acid, which is pro-inflammatory. It's increasing your omega-6 concentration. So this front of package labeling is misinforming individuals, and it's making people think about nutrients rather than as a food. And in fact, in the recent Tufts University food pyramid, they had cereals, processed high sugar cereals on the food pyramid. And you can look at Tufts University to look at that. Here we're looking at two different fruit punches, both fruit punches. And this says natural berry flavor. But when you look at the ingredients, they even have on the side of their package a health blurb. The highest amount is from high fructose corn syrup. In fact, it has less than 1% pear, strawberry juices, and other natural flavorings. If you look at 100% fruit punch, you see it's filtered water and the concentrated fruit juices. Carrot juice is put in there for coloring, but at least you're getting 100% fruit juice rather than added sugars. Now, unless you're an athlete, I recommend that you do not drink your beverages and calories, because taking in liquid calories isn't registered in your stomach the same way solid calories are. Barbara Rolls from Tufts University has research to show that, and I can forward that to you. Liquid calories are lower in all those phytonutrients and fiber that you're getting in other plant-based foods. Here's that deceptive advertising on whole grain versus whole wheat being deceptive advertising. What about nuts? Aren't there healthy nuts? And we can look at different ads that are done talking about healthy nuts. You know, increase your nut intake. The problem is nuts are anywhere from 60 to 95% lipid fat. So they're calorically dense. So eating a handful of nuts may be good, but eating nuts out of the bag or the can isn't beneficial in terms of your body weight. And the amount of body fat you have will determine the amount of inflammation that's going on in your body. With these health claims, particularly with nuts and heart disease, one of the researchers wrote, the scientific evidence suggests, but does not prove, that eating 1.5 ounces per day of most nuts as part of a low in saturated fat and cholesterol, and not resulting in an increased caloric intake, may reduce the risk of heart disease, or may reduce the risk of cognitive decline, loss of memory. But you notice on these claims that are on the products, this does not prove, it does not prove in the first part of the disclaimer, and the qualifier is and not. That's really important. It can't increase caloric intake. Now, a study in 2021 showed about naps that really surprised me, and this is the last thing I want to share in terms of the research. Napping, I used to think naps were excellent. I'm rethinking that a little bit. My neurologist and other clinicians recommend that I clear my mind and just empty my mind, not even meditate where I'm focused on breathing, but just close my eyes, support my neck, and close my eyes and try to empty my mind rather than nap. is beneficial to recharge your cognitive batteries. And while napping is beneficial for cognitive development in younger adults, the research of Lang et al. It suggests that middle and older age adults with more frequent naps were associated with worse attention, memory, and worse learning. So longer naps were associated with worse attention and executive function. And if you'd like any of the studies or you'd like this one, I'm happy to forward them to you. I want to thank everyone for listening to this. I want to especially thank Dr. Ignacio and also one of the doctors who came in to speak that Daniel had for us, Dr. Ingersoll, who admonished us to think about how we were when we came out of the hospital and how far we've come. This is a picture of me getting out of the car straight from the hospital and inpatient care, inpatient rehab. I needed a walker. I was 25 or 20 pounds underweight. I'd lost because of my coma and the time in the hospital. And I couldn't walk 5 yards, let alone 10, 100 or miles. And I also want to thank all of my doctors and clinicians, therapists, family, friends for all the support you've given me. And I appreciate this opportunity. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Professor Eric. That was amazing. Loved it. Really good information.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes. And so such an important testimony there of where you came from and where you are currently. I mean, from not walking 5 yards to just bouncing that, man. That was like an hour, 20-minute lecture that you just belted through there. So hats off, sir. Really, it's such an amazing testimony in progress. And really such great information. I have tons and tons of questions, things to say, but first of all, Michelle, you had a question there?
Yeah, I noticed that olive oil was not in all of those oils, and it's been touted as such a great oil. Why wasn't it included?
Yes, olive oil is high in monounsaturated fatty acids. And that's why, whoops, I'm sorry. Let me, I want to go back to this.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm just fascinated.
No problem. I'm happy to.
And by the way, thank you very much. This is really interesting.
Here's the olive oil, and you can see this gray bar.
I can't see it.
Saturated fatty acids.
I can't see it.
Share screen.
Oh, me?
Yes.
Yes.
You share your screen.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Also, while you're setting up, Eric, I just wanted to mention also along the lines of what Daniel said is that not only was this a lot of excellent information, but the fact that you mentioned to me before that this information is new, right? These are studies, and this is a part of your field that you hadn't even looked into very much before your injury. So the fact that you're expanding your knowledge in this direction is a benefit to us, and we're really grateful for that.
Thank you, Ruben.
Wow. Yeah, I see. This is pretty
Michelle,
amazing.
You can look at this gray bar in olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
That's monounsaturated fat. So it's very high in olive oil. It's high in canola oil. If you look at human body fat as well, it's high in our body fat. It's in our membranes. If you go back to that slide on our membranes, it's high. But it doesn't play a role in inflammation. It has a protective effect, but you need to limit the amount of olive oil that you use. early on.
Wow.
We had a family friend who heard that olive oil was better than butter, and I told her that as much as that. But she was using olive oil like butter in terms of pouring it on her food, on cooking her food, on her salads and everything. But while it's a healthy fat, it contains calories and it's calorically dense. And that's where that Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet comes in, is, having olive oil, having some healthy fats, but having them in moderation so that you don't gain weight, particularly if you're not very active. Like when I came out of the hospital, I was not active at all. You can see by that belt, and I had to be downstairs and a nurse had to take me to the restroom. Some of you are limited in your activity and therefore, can't afford those extra calories from fat.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so, I think there was a question there earlier about air fryer. And so the air fryer, you're not using the oil to fry, you're using air. So that is exactly a way around it. And
exactly.
So, yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're small, but you can make enough for several meals in an air fryer and reduce the amount of calories. Also, you can use those sprays, canola or olive oil sprays, and the amount of calories that you're going to be getting from using that spray is significantly less than you'd be getting if you poured oil on the pan to heat it or on the broiler.
Yes, exactly. And a plug for the avocado oil spray that they have at Costco. It's 0 calories, of course, in the moderation, but like relatively speaking, it's a spray that you can reduce your calories that it's not in your foods, and reducing that omega-6 ratio so that you reduce the amount of pro-inflammatory responses. Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have a weight issue, by all means, take those lipids in. But, as I said, 42% of the American population is obese, and 3/4 of the American population is overweight or obese. So for those of you that don't have a weight issue, healthy fats, nuts, seeds, olive oil, canola oil, by all means use them. But if you do have a weight issue, consider the calories that you're taking in.
A good point. Great point there. Yeah, Leo, you had a question there, sir?
Yeah, Matt, I forgot the timing of today because I'm on the certified personal training course I'm taking. It's chapter 9 I've been doing this week is nutrition. And I was just wondering if taking meat out of my diet, how am I going to support muscle mass? Like, I can't eat that many vegetables and grains. You know what I mean? And
a client of mine and a very good friend.
All these amino acids that you need from meat that are in meat.
You don't. You can use it from a plant-based diet. A very good friend of mine who I used to consult was in the 2012 Olympics. She and her team won a silver medal in cycling on track. And they were watching in the Olympic housing commercials from the National Dairy Society that had advertised, milk does a body good. And they had pictures of Michaela Schifrin and other athletes. Their parents had taken pictures of them drinking milk, and it implied that they become Olympians because they drank milk. She and her teammates and other Olympians decided, we're vegans, we're plant-based. And, she and the others, she's the founder of Switch for Good, that is an organization, nonprofit, that is looking at a plant-based diet and using that and using their influence on Congress to consider the Soy Act now, which is in front of Congress, is a bill to allow soy milk to be used in conjunction with dairy in the school lunch program. So you don't need all that. Leo, you don't need all that extra protein. Trust me. There are power lifters that are vegans. Carl Lewis, who was a 5-time Olympian, he was vegan, and that was decades ago when he was competing. So there's this idea that athletes need more protein. You need adequate amounts of protein, and being an athlete, you do need more protein. But the average American eats 105 to 110 grams of protein a day. The recommendation for sedentary individuals is half of that, about 55 grams of protein. So you're already eating enough protein probably without supplementing it. And what's more important is your nutrient timing when you're taking in foods.
Great point. And so as a coach, personal coach, trainer, you've got all this really great information that you just now armed yourself. And all of us are now armed with. So thank you very much, Dr. Sternlicht. Ying, you had a question?
Yeah. I have a question about the slide called inflammatory marker changes following a high-fat meal with or without fiber. It was toward the end. So if you can put it up, that might make it easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, no, and as he's pulling that up, talk
okay.
about, yeah,
it's up.
Is it up?
Sure, I can.
Is it up?
No, so just share.
Here, let me get that.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, she Ying pulled it up. Thank you, Ying.
So I saw the x-axis on the left side is like hour. So does it mean like, because I was thinking like it's very hard for us to like keep up like a healthy diet every day. So does it mean like if I go out one day and like say to the amusement park and I need to eat all those like high calorie food and high fat meal, does it mean like if on that day I add like 30 grams of fiber to my meal, like it's like great enough for me to like reduce the inflammatory markers?
Well, based on this study, I would say yes. That the subjects ate about 1,000 calorie diet, a meal, and with 1,000 calories, adding 30 grams of fiber significantly reduced the inflammatory markers. So yeah, there's fiber supplements that you can buy either in pill or powder form. It's not as good overall healthy wise as the natural fibers, but if you're going out and you want to do something to make sure your inflammation levels don't go up significantly high, adding fiber won't do anything detrimental.
All right, great.
On that note, eating an apple 30 minutes before a meal will decrease the amount of food that you eat ad lib based on research that subjects ate in the meal if they ate preloaded with an apple.
Ooh. So yeah, I mean, so it sounds
That's
like
amazing.
you got some tricks and hacks there, right? So if you know I'm coming up, right? I'm gonna go to an amusement park. I gotta prepare for it. So having an apple 30 minutes before you go will kind of reduce just the need to put more in there, feeling hungry, and then if you must, you can have also supplement that with fiber, either in the pill or powder form. So while, of course, in moderation, not always, very rarely you should, but if you must, those are some real helpful tricks, right, that you can put in your pocket. Like, let's say you're going to a family party and, and you're worried about it. So those are some real helpful, some like emergency tricks to use. So awesome. Thank you. That's great. Yeah. Jean, you had a question there earlier?
Yeah, I did, and I know we're almost out of time, so I will try to be brief. The question that I had was, I had a very specific question and then a comment if there's time. The question was, when you were talking about salmon, and you sort of got into it a little bit when you were talking about cold water fish, because I've heard that wild-caught salmon is much healthier than farm salmon, but I'm concerned about accessibility because it's so much cheaper to buy farm salmon than to buy wild-caught salmon. And so I'm wondering if there is much of a difference in the nutrition value.
There is, in terms of the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So yeah, the fatty acid levels will be different because it depends upon what they're feeding the farmed salmon and the temperature that their environment is in. If it's a warmer environment, if they're not able to swim deep, then they'll have more omega-6 to omega-3 ratio.
Yeah, thank you. That confirmed what I was thinking as well. And I am so grateful for this presentation. It arms us with the information that we need to go and talk to our providers. And what I think is really important for us just in general is to help educate people, because this is the common sense stuff that we do need and everybody needs to be healthy. And it's consistent with what is going on in the rest of the world, honestly. And it's sustainable as far as the planet as well. But I also am concerned about accessibility, because if you're on SNAP, or in a food desert, it is harder to get access to these kinds of products. And if you have limited mobility and have trouble cooking, there's lots of issues that impact this. And insurance doesn't pay for these kinds of things. So anyway, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Eric.
Just one thing I might say, Jean. I used to be able to cook. I can barely cook anymore because of my short-term memory. If I look at a recipe and then I look up, I can't remember what I just looked at. So cooking.
I have that problem as well.
Yeah, cooking's become a challenge. But I eat frozen vegetables. I used to, buy vegetables and combine them. Now I eat primarily frozen vegetables and broccoli slaw to make meals easy for me. And you're better off eating frozen than eating processed food. Yes, fresh vegetables would be great. Yes, fresh beans and legumes would be great. But canned beans and frozen fruit and vegetables is better than processed food. And now with the new flash freezing method that they use, very little nutrients are lost in the freezing process, particularly if it does have some ice crystals in it from thawing and then refreezing. Eating that or drinking that fluid, so putting it on top of rice.
100% in agreement. But I think I mentioned way up in the chat that my nutrition was better before. I made everything from scratch. I never ate processed food, and now I have to sometimes. And I'm the highest weight I've ever been in my life, and I eat less. But, I'm doing the best that I can, as we all are. So, we do what we can. I'm just saying that we need to educate people because nobody's going to get rich from this, unfortunately. No drug company, no healthcare program, and it's up to us to, spread the word. That's all. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So excellent. I know I want to respect your time, Dr. Sternlicht. Would you? We have one more question. Is that? Do you have time for that, or are we?
Sure, definitely.
Okay, perfect. Yes, and we have one more question here.
Okay. Yeah, I have two. I'll try to be quick. I'm not absorbing B1. I take a supplement. Recently, I found a different type of B1 that might be more absorbable. It's like to try to get the information from my neurologist. She's the one who spotted it, and she wants to give me infusions. Really, I would do it. At first, I have to find a place, which took me a long time, but I have found a place to get the infusions. Do you know about that? I try to eat some B1 foods, but do you know anything about that? What that significant?
I mean, some individuals do have absorption issues, particularly if you have colitis or inflammatory colitis. But I'm not a clinician, and I would always recommend seeing a clinician, a doctor.
What is the specialty you're talking about? Clinician meaning?
A doctor, an MD, your primary care physician. I
don't know whether I'll get anywhere. I have an appointment with her coming up, so we'll see what happens. I have a quick second question. I do eat a lot of vegetables, and it's a good idea to steam them rather than overcook them. Is there anything difference between juicing your vegetable and blending your vegetable? What's the difference? Using a blender to get a vegetable drink. I'm not putting in too much fruit, but just a vegetable drink. Juicing the vegetable, which is very common these days, or blending it. Do I go out and buy a $200 to $300 juicer? That kind of thing.
Well, you don't want an extractor that takes out the fiber, because the fiber is part of the beneficial nutrients in that juice. So,
so a juicer would do that, wouldn't it? Take out the fiber. It would give you.
Some of them do.
Okay, well, it's good to know. It's cheaper. Okay, thank you.
That is good to know. It is great to know. So yeah, excellent. Thank you very much for your time. So informational and so educational. And there are some things that I'd love to follow up with you on. But
thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely, like the whole grain.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Daniel.
Right, the HSCRP test. Avoid farm-raised fish, and by doing things with a whole food plant-based diet, you can change these inflammatory markers in your diet in 2 to 4 weeks. And so, which is, like you said, relatively fast, right? And so, the last thing there is the gut flora differences that were significantly different in those inflammatory cytokines for healthy controls versus clinically depressed individuals is, that's a 2023 article as I saw it there. So, incredible, right? So like if you're finding yourselves like, oh man, I'm in a rut, I'm having all these, the difficulties with, mental health, sadness, depression, could very well be, and we're starting to, the story kind of comes out more, is there seems to really be a biological basis could be possibly to some of these things. And so, and how much of what your choices you're making day to day and what you put in your body is contributing to that. And so I think such an important tool and concept and perspective to arm ourselves with. So thank you very much, Dr. Sternlicht. So let's give a brain injury welcome and thank you to Dr. Sternlicht. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sternlicht. Woo!
Thank you, guys.